I'm Greta Chapman. I'm the retiring CEO for the South Dakota Hall of Fame, and with me today for a legacy video are the Tieszen family members, Deb, Leslie, and Laura. And we are here to talk about Craig. So let's start with whoever wants to have the opening story. Would that be you?
That would probably be me. Well, the story is that in his life adventures, what he wanted most to do was to help people. And so all of the aspects of his life were based on trying to help people learn how to help themselves, for one thing, and helping the kids feel good about themselves.
That would be these kids.
These kids
and
as
others.
well as the
worldwide
Club for Boys.
Oh yeah, that's
boys,
right. Yeah.
Because that was his pet project.
Yeah.
And I think that he accomplished that. He did that very well in all the aspects of his life. You know, some of us can take on a few different things and only do well in one and not so well. And he was good in all aspects of his life.
He occasionally would tell us that, right?
Oh,
because
absolutely.
I worked with
Yes.
him, and
Yes,
so
sir.
yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
ma'am.
sometimes I got told that too.
Yeah. So I think that's the basis of his story, was just to be a good guy that people could emulate and provide them a chance to make their lives as best as they could be, and also to maybe restart their lives if necessary.
So, what would be your version of Father Craig Tieszen?
Our dad was an interesting man in that he was very even-keeled. He approached everything from a viewpoint of logic, but not without emotion. You know, he was just very thoughtful whenever he approached conversations. I never saw him lose his temper. He did have a very good way of making sure he knew if you knew if he was disappointed, which was 10 times worse. But he just was a very thoughtful man, and we nicknamed him the Ponderer because he was famous for pondering. He would be, he was very considerate in that he thought about viewpoints from a lot of different angles. He was open-minded when he spoke with others. He really wanted to learn from others and understand where they were coming from. And I just always felt like as a dad and that father figure in our house, he just, he would always kind of approach conversations as he was guiding us through these major decisions in our lives, really trying to help us figure out where we wanted to go.
It's a trick.
Yeah.
Well, not a trick, but a skill.
He definitely had opinions. Don't get me wrong. He had opinions about where we should go.
Okay.
But for the most part, he was there to just help us get to the right conclusion for ourselves. But in a way that was, well thought out, was logical. He didn't approach things with, just a high level of emotion. And he was not an impulsive man generally. So then when he was, which was sometimes on vacation, that was a lot of fun for us. Vacation dad was always fun.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Kind of contradicted some of his normal philosophies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And might I
rare
add,
too. So
the pondering thing really drove my teenage girls nuts.
Well, as a colleague, there were times it was also, can we get towards it?
Yes,
No, I'm not done yet. So the trickster on vacation, and what would you say about that? And just your father in general.
I just think there were times where, sometimes on vacation, he would splurge on certain adventures, or I know a couple of his interests involved a little bit of impulsivity. Or lack of logic. Sometimes
right.
he a lot of people that know him know that he invested in a yellow Mustang, for example. Not always the most logical choice, but kind of that contradicting behavior that we learn to love because he.
The yellow or the Mustang?
Yeah,
Both.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Well, and he was a bit of a penny pincher in daily life, but on vacation, suddenly it was like, if you catch him at the right moment and go up and ask him for $20, he'll probably hand it over pretty easily. So he did always value very heavily adventures. So, our family was fortunate that, we never had the nicest house on the block or the most fancy car other than the flashy yellow Mustang later in life. But we always had the opportunity to travel, and
Yep.
so he made that a high priority. He got that from his parents, and so I think he instilled that in us, and really always seeking out other ways of life and those adventures that happened. So we had a lot of adventures, whether they were road trips or flights across the world. But he was really big on getting out and exploring the world.
So, Laura, what would you say, do you think, as a family overall, would be some of the really cool or great accomplishments, things that, some milestones that kind of come to mind, whatever age, as a family?
I don't know. I think, again, the encouraging words of kind of going out on our own. As much as he was a South Dakota man, he didn't hesitate when the two of us wanted to adventure outside of the state lines a little bit. And maybe deep down he knew that we would make our way back and always consider South Dakota home. So I think that was one big accomplishment, is we both sort of spread wings and each kind of found our own adventure for a little while, and so I thought that was kind of encouraging, knowing that he was okay with us sort of leaving for a little while. Yep, for college, and then afterward for a few years, and then and now I'm back in Rapid City, but that was kind of nice to know that he kind of had our backs in that sense.
What do you want to say about the family accomplishments?
The family accomplishments. Oh, that's a...
Well, you can zero in on Craig if you'd like.
Oh, him. Yeah.
I mean, however you want.
Craig Tieszen is my favorite subject.
Yeah.
So I can try to think of something. I think he was so good at balancing his life. He had so many hats that he put on, and he was good at all of them. And I think that's a big accomplishment all by itself, is that, most of us can do 2 or 3 things, 4 things in our lives, but this guy had 6 or 7 or 8, and he was good at all of them. But the common thread was helping people. It goes back to helping people, and he did that very well, and that's what I'm most proud of for him. That's what he wanted.
I think a lot of us would agree, though, that he was always the same guy.
Yeah, yeah.
No matter who he was talking to or what role or hat he was wearing, I felt like you always got the same person. He had a very consistent personality that if you knew him, you knew what we knew. I mean...
Do you think you have that similar characteristic? This is a test.
I think so. Yeah, I do. I mean, he was such a great role model. I will say, particularly from a leadership perspective, he was drawn to a life of public service, and he chose that life over and over again. And, there's a lot of leadership that is needed in that space. And what I always appreciated was that even in whatever path I chose, that I could relate to him, and he and I could have great conversations about, what leadership entailed. And a lot of it is being authentic and showing up as your authentic self, regardless of the situation, and the willingness to be vulnerable when you maybe have fallen short, or the willingness to have hard conversations and understand that you may not always come to agreement with people, but to be open-minded and to have those conversations. So I do think that him demonstrating that throughout his life has impacted me, and then how I show up in my life.
Laura, what about you for your teaching?
Same, yeah. As a
kids?
teacher, that authentic self, when you chimed in and said that, really hits home, because my students know very much about me as a teacher and as Mrs. Kamarainen, but they also very much know me as a mom. And so we see our class as a family, and we talk a lot about each other's families. They have pictures they've brought in. So I want to also know them as their authentic self. I like to hear about things outside of school, a lot of their passions and interests. So I try to be the same person, consistently with friends and family, and in my role as an educator. And so hopefully that, they see that too. And that's something, again, coming from my dad, that really is inspiring. And just the phrase and the idea of working hard for others. We talk a lot about that in our classroom even. What are you saying or doing that's building up others? So
I think it's interesting the balance, you being able and to wear many hats, but at the same time, this predictability, this stability, and yet this playfulness.
right.
That's a whole body picture there, in that whole. So, what do you think Craig would? You've said some of those things, but how do you think he would really? And maybe you saw this with the Boys Club. How did he inspire young people? You've talked about it as a family, but what are some things that resonate that would say this is a Craig Tieszen moment with? Keep this in mind for chasing your dreams. To channel him, so to speak. What would that maybe sound?
I think that Craig kind of created a roadmap for himself and for others, and he shared that with us in 2012 at the December commencement ceremony for the School of Mines. And the first thing he encouraged was continued education. These engineering students were graduating, but he said continued education is very important because you get along with others, you learn how to problem solve, and it just gives you more opportunities for a path for your best self. And the second thing was the adventure. He said, be adventurous and think outside the box. A series of adventures, and think outside the box, and share what you've learned. And that's pretty much what it was. Would
you add to that?
I would say that the way that I saw my dad inspire young people is that, especially with the boys that he worked with through the Boys Club, a lot of them had not had access to experiences, especially in the outdoors. When he started the program to do the bike riding of the Mickelson Trail, these were new experiences for so many of these boys. And I think what was great about that is that he made it clear that it did not matter where you came from. It didn't matter what your previous experience had been. Everyone was welcome. Everyone was doing it, for the first time. And if you weren't doing it for the first time, then he expected you to, then to lead the others. So I think that, trying new experiences, but also, not being too overcome by, where you think you might be stuck in life, but really push yourself and try new things. So I think he inspired that in a lot of boys by just exposing them to things that maybe they had never even considered. And that was always really neat to see. I know Laura and I rode with him on a couple of those rides.
Yeah.
And, it was always fascinating to hear the stories of the boys because they didn't even know how much pride they were going to have until they went on that. And then to see their faces and know that they could accomplish something like riding the entire Mickelson Trail.
109 miles.
Yes.
And some wanted, there were times where some wanted to quit.
Yeah.
And that wasn't something either that he let them do
easily. He
in an inspiring way, I think.
He helped them set the big audacious goals and then accomplish it and celebrate those accomplishments. So I think that process, could apply to so many things in their lives. But for them, that sense of accomplishment was so incredible.
And I have one more thing regarding the Club for Boys. Dave Euler wrote one time that Craig would come to the Club for Boys in his police uniform. And that was a moment for these kids to talk to a policeman, a cop, in a kind way. And he wanted to make sure that they understood that police are good.
Yeah.
That they are protectors.
In chaos. Yeah.
Because a lot of the kids have family members or mom and dad or somebody where the police have come into the house and arrested them and put handcuffs on, and so that's what a lot of these kids had experienced. And for him to show them that no, police are good people.
It was a positive interaction.
Yes, and it was very important to him that they learned that from him.
Yeah, and he was the interesting part about him was that he was an interesting balance of analytical, which is the engineering background in him, right? He was very logical and analytical in his approach. And he really had a very personable side to him. And so I think that thinking through the emotional connection, that kids would have with police officers in that regard. Really, and he set the tone for the entire department. It really is, has been set up to be more of a community policing, and being a part of the community in a positive way that I think is so different than what so many other communities have experienced. That's really what sets him apart, I think.
Yeah.
I think hopefully you've seen in the last, well, it's been a year plus to come to the ceremony, but hopefully it's more and more evident that stories continue. We've got inductees 100 years ago.
Right.
They're on to their third and fourth generation. So don't ever underestimate how the channeling is always there. So.
And they have mentioned that to me.
No, we feel his impact every day.
Yeah, on different projects that they've worked on or whatever, they'll say, I really felt Dad today, Mom. And so it's like, oh, God.
Well, it's that's what we hope to do, and we're very appreciative of you not only being here, but being able to walk through, more than enough challenges. Yeah.
I will just say, I think that our dad would be absolutely tickled to be, a part of such a prestigious group of people, to have his life of service recognized. He wasn't one to put himself out there for recognition. He did it because this is what he chose and what he loved. And at the same time, he built a fantastic, network of friends and supporters across the state. He cared deeply about the state, growing up on the eastern side and settling and living most of his life, in Rapid City. I think, he really did care a lot about the state of South Dakota. So I think this honor and this recognition would have meant so much to him. And so we're just thrilled to be able to have him included in this great group.
And to share his stories.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you to the Hall of Fame Board of Directors for recognizing that as well.
Well, I think it was pretty easy for him.
Oh.